Very often, although a person has a clear understanding, literally at an absolute level of reality, but unfortunately, we get distracted. You have a perspective, you have a focus, you have an objective, but life allows itself to be exposed to things which distract us. We speak about the 13 tenets of Jewish belief. Every observant Jew, a Jew who believes in the authenticity of the written and oral law and believes in God, believes in every one of these tenets without a question. And it's the basis for a Jew to have a share in the world to come, whether it's believing in divine providence, believing in prophecy, believing that Moshe was a prophet and he was the greatest prophet who ever lived, those who preceded him, who followed him. The Torah we have was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Torah is immutable, will never change. God is aware of our thoughts, our actions. We pray only to God, to no one but God. These are the tenets of Jewish faith, coming of Mashiach, resurrection. We all believe in this. But yet, although we believe in these things, but we live our lives in a way where somehow it seems that we forgot about these tenets. We're not committed to these tenets, because if these tenets would be real in our lives, we'd behave differently. And every moment we have would be seen as the ultimate opportunity to do what we should be doing and to have it fully invested in what it should be invested in. But it's not. Reward and punishment. Nothing goes unseen by God. And ultimately, there is reward and punishment. And we believe reward and punishment is, on the positive side, the ultimate. On the negative side, a level of dread. There's nothing compared to it. But yet, we enter into areas where we put ourselves in a position to have a level of liability and culpability, and we turn our backs on the ultimate opportunity, which is guaranteed. No ifs or buts. Definite return on that initiative. What's it all about? The answer is very simple. It's called distraction. The way God created a human being, a person has to have focus. If you have focus, that's first and foremost, you have to have focus. And you have to be fully knowledgeable and aware of the severity of the transgression. If a person walks through a field and he's told, you have to be careful. There's stones, there are depressions, there are mines, and there's contaminated area, and there's quicksand. All these things simultaneously. And you don't know, you may think you're stepping on something which is secure, but you may not be secure. Your underfooting is not secure. You may just fall in and be pulled in. Would a person even attempt or dare to even enter into that location without taking every level of precaution and studying that terrain, only if he has to go through that field? Otherwise, he doesn't go there. No, there's an expression, play it safe. Why take a risk? And it's a risk, which is not even a risk, you're definitely going to fail. Without that studying and preparing to enter into that area, it is impossible not to literally forfeit your life. Literally forfeit your life. You need a map, mind map, where the mines are, where the depressions are, where the quicksand is, where the vipers are, and it's all filled of all that. It's every moment it's something, another issue. You don't go there. But factually, that's what life is all about. Every moment that we're endowed with life, it's the upside on the ultimate level and the downside, God forbid, on the worst level. And every moment has that value, the positive, negative. But you say it's impossible to have that level of focus, to have that cognizance continuously, to fully invest every moment as it should be invested in the positive, or not to somehow have some kind of unawareness or blind spot, whether it's deliberate or unintentional. But why don't you prepare for it? Because again, there are many things, because we live in a physical world, there's a certain process which is called being desensitized, and we become numb to many things. And things feed on themselves. You make a mistake once, it's a mistake. You repeat it, it's called negative conditioning. And a human being has relevance to conditioning. Rambam writes that even if a person is born with inborn traits, characteristics, which may be negative, a person could create through conditioning, reconditioning, a second nature. And you go, and he explains how to do this. And over time, ultimately, your inclination will change. You'll be inclined to do good things. The Chinuch writes that if a person is evil and he's forced over an extended period of time to do good deeds and all be involved with something that's positive and pure and good, ultimately that person will become devoutly righteous. Although he's forced to do those good deeds. Why? Because a person is affected, impacted, and molded based on his involvements, his activities. And he says if you take a devoutly righteous person and you force him over time to do acts of evil and transgress continuously, ultimately that person's become a rasha. He's become an evil person. Why? Because man is affected and developed and molded due to his experiences, his actions, and his involvements in life. That is the nature of a human being. So the way God created a human being, if you're able to pick your environment and you make choices to be involved in good things, not bad things, the more good you're involved in, the better you're going to become. That is the nature, years ago, when a person wanted a copy of something, he took carbon paper, put it into a typewriter, and the keys would hit that paper with a certain force, and the carbon paper would actually, being covered with ink, would leave its imprint on the back page. That's how you made a carbon copy. That's what's called the carbon copy. That's what it is. We ourselves are carbon copies of our experiences in life. You do good things, the impact, the imprint is positive. But it's not only a record of what you did. It literally, if you put your hand on the back of the paper that you had, those typewriters, you felt actually it was like indented. It was like embossed. Not a full embossment, it was embossed. That's what it was. That's exactly what God created us. We are impacted, embossed, imprinted, emblazoned with the positive or the negative. That's what we are. And the more positive we have, the more we appreciate positive. The more negative experience we have through our own, even not our own initiative, due to involvement, the more negatively, the more diminished we become, the more deficient we become. And deficiency breeds and draws towards things which don't generate what you should be. I always say, Albert Einstein, he was one of the greatest geniuses in his time, one of a kind of physicist. came up with the law of relativity, all that. But besides his intellect and his genius in physics, in terms of his personal deportment, his personality, all other areas of life relating to him as a person, he may have been the nicest person in the world. He had a certain eccentric side to him. Why? Because he was never mentored. He was never mentored and molded and controlled to take all that specialness that he has, which is one of a kind, to be channeled in the most positive way. So if it's not channeled, what is it? It goes in every direction. It's uncontrolled. When something is not in a certain infrastructure, format, what it doesn't develop, it doesn't happen. The genius is genius. He understands, he grasps certain things, he's able to come upon certain conclusions. Theory of relativity, okay? But other areas of life, which is molding and literally developing and creating a special human being that takes endless amount of effort and channeling and pounding and suppression, doesn't happen by itself. Doesn't. Because we're not inclined to that. But if you take the Torah sages of the same period, Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who was one of a kind of a genius, where from the time he was born, he was mentored and controlled, and his father influenced him every moment of his life, inculcated him values, perspectives, beliefs, and being exposed to the greatest, the holiest people of the generation. Rabbi Chaim Brisker, Zech Tzaddik Levrach, wasn't only the greatest mind of his generation, even as a devoutly righteous tzaddik, a person who was one of a kind, giving his shirt off his back was an understatement in terms of his acts of chesed, that anybody who was involved in that area, they would pale compared to Rabbi Soloveitchik. That's how great he was. But nothing happens out of a vacuum. Nothing develops out of a vacuum. It takes a tremendous amount of oversight, mentoring, investment to channel those special qualities together with the genius to develop this super person, this one of a kind of a person. Otherwise, it doesn't happen by itself. The challenges of life, and that it started from the very beginning. You know, a person goes and is good looking, dresses well, speaks well. He comes, he applies for a position. And they ask him, why are you qualified for this position? He says, because I'm a good looking person. I speak well, and I'm a good person. But they said, it's not sufficient qualifications. You don't have the credentials. And by the way, how much salary do you think you want to earn? Minimally 6 figures, just for the first 2 weeks. Then I want to raise immediately. They said, why? What do you think you deserve that? Because I think I'm a pretty smart guy. And what could you do with your so-called smartness? Well, you realize when I pick a tie and a suit, and that, you know, nobody could pick ties and suits and shoes and socks the way I do. But do you realize that doesn't warrant that kind of salary? It warrants nothing. You're a liability. You're not profitable. A person himself entering into a world as this, which has a level of complication, without mentoring, without preparation, without studying, without vision, without clarity, you go off the cliff immediately. So you forget about, we're not even talking about liability, but why do you deserve to be compensated or rewarded for anything you do? Why? So we're put in the position, you really have to do something monumental, relatively speaking, to be worthy. And if you don't do something, and if you're not headed and growing in that direction, naturally you regress. A human being, based on the words of the prophets, is called a holech. There's always movement. An angel is created to be the angel, whoever he is that. From the moment he's created till God wills he should no longer exist. A human being, it either advances or regresses. A human being, stagnation means regression. Because every moment you have value in that moment, so either you advance yourself, and if you don't, that's called a regression. That's going backwards. But that's from the first moment of creation. This is the purpose, and that's how man achieves a level of perfection that he's worthy to have the relationship with God. Because as God is perfect, and God is not subject to influences, which has anything to do other than what he is, identically, we could only have relevance to him if we assume that same posture and profile, and that it could only be brought about if we follow his script that he says, this is the way you do it. Although the way you do it is not really in sync with our persona, which is physical, which is inclined to go in the opposite direction. It's not that. The Torah tells us, Kadoshim tiyu, ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem. You must be holy because I am holy. What does it mean, you must be holy? So the Midrash tells us, even something that's permitted to you, and you are permitted to partake of it, you have to wean yourself from physicality. King Solomon writes in Proverbs, Tzadik ochel l'soven nafsho. A tzaddik, when he eats, he only eats to the point just to save his soul. Meaning a minimal level. Could you imagine a person signing the best deal of his life, the greatest deal of his life, and his wife calls him up and says, honey, did you eat breakfast? When was the last time you ate? He says, about 36 hours ago. What's going on? He says, you don't realize every moment that I'm concluding this deal, it's a deal of the century. At best, I have time to just grab a cup of coffee. Nothing more than that, and drink some water to be hydrated. More than that, as long as I'm able to maintain myself to continue, that's all I don't do more than that. I just have to be functional sufficiently to be able to close the deal. A tzaddik, a devoutly righteous person, he understands what the objective of his life is. It's really to address the objective, not to get distracted with all the minutiae of life and what's unimportant. Therefore, when a tzaddik eats and partakes, regardless of how delicious it may be, or how beneficial it may be physically, which is something which he doesn't need to meet the standard to succeed in what he's trying to do. He has no interest in it. No interest. Give you an example. A person could be the leading Torah sage of a generation, literally. And a person could become very wealthy, and he will take that money and support Torah causes. Which, if you'd be advising that person, what should the advice be? To be the leading Torah sage of the generation and to disseminate Torah, mentor students, or make this enormous amount of money and become the philanthropist supporting the right causes. There's no question. It means kemach ein Torah. We live in the physical world. But factually, God determines how things work out. Torah is guaranteed. God says Judaism will never, God forbid, become extinct. Torah will always be in place. How many Jews? That's a different story. But the Torah itself, a Jewish people, which is the core, is the spirituality of the Jew is dependent on Torah that will never be forgotten. God can make it happen even if you don't become the philanthropist. But disseminating Torah and mentoring students, that only happens if you go and you become that special Torah sage and you have the capacity and the ability to make the difference. That's what it is. There's a story, Paul Reichman, who's known as Moshe Reichman, during the war, he studied in London. And there was a yeshiva in London, maybe it was a little bit before the war and during the war. It was called Schneider's Yeshiva, because the Rosh Yeshiva of this yeshiva was called Rabbi Schneider. And he was a student of the Chavetz Chaim. And Paul Reichman studied there. And the person, he himself is one of the leading Torah sages today in Israel. His name is Rabbi Moshe Sternbach. He's originally from Switzerland, from Zurich. And each of them, they were the same age, and they had responsibilities in the yeshiva. Rabbi Sternbach's responsibility was to awaken the boys early to study before davening, before the morning services. Moshe Reichman's responsibility was to go to the bakery, get fresh bread for boys to eat for breakfast. So Moshe Reichman became this phenomenally wealthy person, the richest Jew in the world, one of the richest people at that time, the greatest philanthropist of his time. And Moshe Sternbach became this great Torah sage. So Moshe Reichman said, Paul Reichman said, maybe if I would have been the one to wake up the boys to go study, and he would have went to the bakery to get fresh bread, I'd be the Moshe Sternbach, and he'd be the Paul Reichman. We would have had different roles. So even the man who's the greatest philanthropy of the century, Jewish philanthropist, he says, something, if I could have been that, I would have preferred that. But as they say, God sets the script. But you have to have merit. Because he did that, I had this. My merit was less than his merit. This is the way he spoke out of humility, no question. But again, how do you contend with all the issues? You got to be, einam oretz chosid. A person's an ignoramus. You can't be a devoutly righteous person. Ignorance may be bliss, and you think everything you do is right, but it's wrong. So you have to do things. You have to read the script. You have to study the script. You have to read between the lines, and you have to know how to overcome all our conflicts of interest. Because human being is naturally conflicted. We naturally are inwardly focused. It's us and we and I, and that's where it repeats itself. So how do you somehow extricate yourself from that and pull yourself out of that and to be above it all and be able to see what's truly in one's best interest, which is selfless, unrelated to your own self-gain, which is called selfish. It should be selfless, not selfish. And that's the challenge of life. And from the very beginning, Adam, although he didn't have the struggles that he had afterwards, before he ate the tree of knowledge, but he was tested. He failed the test. He saw something which was attractive, visually, in every sense of the word, and he could have resisted for whatever he chose and justified succumbing to it. But that's life. Life is very addictive, very attractive, and we're sensuous. A human being is a sensuous being. We have senses, and those senses pick up things. If you walk into certain department stores, they usually have on the ground floor, they have the perfume department. And the moment you walk in, you smell fragrance, whatever it is. This is all part of marketing. Because the moment you smell that fragrance, you think about, maybe I should buy something for my wife. Or the woman says, I should go over to the counter. And before she realizes, she's spending $300-400 on cosmetics. And if you walk into the men's section, also there's a certain smell of the garments, quality garments or ordinary garments. And you touch it, it has a certain feel of quality. The moment you touch that fabric, and you figure you got a credit card, it's $10,000 to sell it for $4,000. I think I could afford that suit, although you haven't worn the suit you bought last year on sale. But it's something that attracts us. We're very sensuous. And God endowed us with those senses that despite that they pick up everything and we're pulled that way, we have to invest it differently. You know, one says, at Havdalah, we say, Boraminim Psomim. We say a blessing over spices to restore ourselves, that when we lose at the end of the Shabbos, our advanced level of spirituality is like smelling salts, to revive ourselves. Or if you don't smell, you can't enjoy food. There's a mitzvah on Shabbos to enjoy the food. Oneg Shabbos. If you don't have a sense of smell and taste, you can't enjoy it. The mitzvah is to enjoy it within the context of mitzvah. That is the mitzvah. Doesn't it indulge? It's a enjoy. Okay? But it's all a challenge. What do I enjoy? How do I enjoy it? There's a mitzvah to nap on Shabbos. The acronym Shabbos, Shabbos, Shina b'Shabbos Tainug. Sleeping on Shabbos is Tainug. Do you sleep away the whole Shabbos? Or take a small nap, which will affect you positively to re-energize yourself. Everything's a balance. Everything in life is in measures. Person that overeats, he gets sick. Very often, there's a fact, a person eats, and when he finishes eating, literally, he's eaten to a point where he has pain in his stomach because he's really overeaten. And many people, they finish the Shabbos meal, they feel not full, they feel stuffed to the point that the stomach hurts them. And somehow they have to be relieved. Rambam writes that a person shouldn't eat more than 50% of his full, health-wise. Eating even to the sated point is not healthy, because that's called overtaxing the system. He's speaking from a medical point of view. You want to speak on a spiritual point of view? That already King Solomon speaks about. A tzaddik eats to sate his soul. That's it. More than that is totally considered excess. That's called excess. Again, it's a perspective. But you could have the best perspective in the world, but to be able to internalize it and value it and understand it and appreciate it, you have to be mentored. You have to have the capacity to absorb it. 13 tenets of belief, one punishment, but yet we fail continuously. But why? Of course, we're not sufficiently mentored and controlled environment-wise, and we expose ourselves to many things, which doesn't allow ourselves to have the capacity to fully appreciate what opportunity is, and God forbid, what is not in our best interest, which is ultimately detrimental to our existence. And this is why Torah is Masorah. Torah itself is all tradition. All these fundamentals, these understandings, are passed down from generation to generation. Started at Sinai. Aseh l'chorav. You need a teacher to teach you the rudiments of survival, which is the study of Torah, doing the mitzvah correctly. These are all spiritual endeavors. Because the more we engage and we're involved in spiritual, intellectually, belief-wise, and action-wise, the less we're inclined to do, which is something which is contrary to what that is. Aseh l'chorav knei l'chochover. You have to have the right teacher, and you have to have the right friend to tell you when you start going off the rails a little bit. Because the rabbi, he's the rabbi. What about your friend? He's your peer. And if he appreciates you doing the wrong thing, if you're smart, you'd listen. And when the friend doesn't understand, the rabbi fills in. So between the balance of the friend and the rabbi, hopefully you become smart enough and intelligent enough and wise enough, you'll take the good advice and maximize on whatever your life is all about.